Graham, thanks so much for doing this. I can tell you're a busy man. Look at that studio office you've got behind. Is that home?
Oh, this is home, yes, and this is where I do all the Boom programs from. And we've got the well, you can't see the CDs on my left, so that would be probably all right. And those albums, I mean, they go back years and years. Some of which I bought, and then some when I first joined Capital. You know how they sent all the promotion
Yeah,
albums, and it was like Christmas every day.
yeah.
Wow, this is fantastic! And until I found myself having to listen religiously to every track on every album and every single. And it took up all my day, but it was a labour of love. So I'm surrounded by what I do, which is great for the atmosphere, Helen.
That's brilliant. Now, you were the first voice on Boom. Tell me about that. What did you choose as your picks?
Yes, it was like launching a ship. It was fantastic. I've never launched a station before. I've been on stations when they started, but well, the first record, which was I think it was picked by the audience, was "All You Need Is Love" by the Beatles. So that was the first. Oh, it was a long time ago, Helen. I can't remember what I had for lunch, but yeah, I remember playing "Sail on Sailor" by the Beach Boys, and oh, I can't remember anything
Well,
else. It's
but sail
hopeless.
on
You know what it's
sailor.
like.
Well, we're all in that position. I forget what I'm going to open the fridge for. Sail on Sailor, the Beach Boys, that kind of music's one of your great loves, isn't it?
Yeah, when I was a teenager, I loved singing. I've got an ear for harmony, so we had a little harmony group with my mates and we'd sing on street corners, trying to do the old doo-wop thing they used to do in the States. And yeah, I've always loved those harmonies, those sibling harmonies in particular. And you know, there was so much Beach Boys music that doesn't get an airing anywhere and should, not just the hits, obviously they do, but yeah. So I thought, well, I'd go in and that would set a template, a musical template, and people would know that they're going to get a bit of everything on Boom, which is our template.
There's something incredibly uplifting about those harmonies, isn't there? Even if they're not your favourite sort of music, they arrest you when you hear them.
Oh, as I say, with sibling harmonies in particular, you know, you get the family groups like well, the Osmonds and duos like the Everly Brothers. There's just something about them that make them sound better than others. Just
I,
something.
I agree. I agree. Now, you actually started your radio career in hospital radio, which is sort of, often forgotten as a very important kind of place for people to get a feel for. What appealed to you about it?
Well, I was working at the BBC at the time, and I think it was Tuesday evening, a couple of us from my office went off and did hospital radio. And I remember my friend used to tell horror stories, and I used to play the charts. And it was at oh, where was it? St Mary's in Paddington? That's right. It doesn't exist anymore. I think it's a block of flats. But yeah, it's just that was the first time I actually went into a studio and played all the records. They were on vinyl at the time. And I actually managed to close down the radio station as well, because there was a button I pressed. Goodness knows where it was, why it was, but it closed down the radio station for about a year, and I felt terribly responsible. But yeah, that was my start. It was terrific. It was great fun, and from there, well, it all took off.
But you were at the BBC, but not playing records at the
No,
BBC. Clearly, you went to St Mary's for that. What were you
no.
doing there?
Well, my first job was in administration. My first job actually was in the Langham Hotel, which is at the end of Portland Place, which used to be a BBC building. You'd know that very well,
I
Helen.
did some of my local radio training there.
Right. Well, I was in local radio. Well, I'll tell you about that later. So they had the BBC club there, and my first job. If you know London, if you know Portland Place, where the BBC is, there's this lovely Langham Hotel, as it is now, a five-star hotel. And if you look on the first floor, on the right-hand side, there's a big bay window, and that was my very first office. It was audience research. So I had to type this and that. And they taught me to type. So that was one good thing. Came in very handy for computers. And then they transferred me to BH Proper Broadcasting House on the second floor, where they put me into the library. And I thought, this is great, the music library. No, it wasn't. It was the book library. So there I was doing typing out requests for books and magazines for the various programs and producers. But next door there was this huge office where all the magazines, including the music magazine, used to come in every Wednesday. So I went next door and I said, "Oh, would it be possible for me to take those round to Radio 1 and Radio 2?" And they said, "Yeah, sure, be our guest." They didn't want to have to do it. And there I met somebody who who would then really shape my career. His name was Dave Dennis. His name was Neil Spence. He had been a pirate radio DJ where he was called Dave Dennis. Some people, I'm sure, will remember him from Radio London days, Big L. And he was just filling in there, took the magazines round and got talking. And some weeks later, I got a call in the office, and it was him. He said, "Do you still want to be a DJ? Because there's this industrial broadcasting station starting at United Biscuits." And I said, "Well, this sounds good. It's better than being on the high seas rolling around." And yes, that was UBN, United Biscuits Network, that United Biscuits set up to really cut down their staff turnovers. People, I mean, it's so different now because of all the machinery that's been implemented. And, whereas it was full of people on conveyor belts and they all had their own speakers, I mean, it was a terrific setup, and it really worked because they had a huge staff turnover rate.
You mean the biscuit makers? The biscuit makers, not the radio station.
No. The biscuit makers along the conveyor belts, and they were very monotonous jobs and very noisy as well. And in the summer, very hot. So there was a huge staff turnover rate. And the idea was that perhaps, if they had their own radio station with their request cards, that might help. And it did. It cut down the staff turnover by around 70 or 80%. So it really paid for itself. And then they loved it. And, it was us just talking to them, and there were about 5 different factories around the UK. So it
was actually, I didn't, until I interviewed Nicky Horn, who also worked for United Biscuit radio station, I had no idea how influential it had been and how much it had plucked sort of nascent talent. And a lot of you went on to do great things. I mean, what was it gave you? You were coming from hospital radio, really, and the library into a radio station. What did you learn?
Well, it was so buzzy, as you can imagine, because there we were in a fabulous suite of studios. It was done properly. I mean, if we'd had a proper aerial, Helen, we would have given Radio 1 a run for their money. There's no question about that. And yes, it was a breeding ground for the early days of commercial radio. People like Adrian Love, Roger Scott. I'm going to miss people out here, as you said, Nicky Horn, and lots of others came through as well. I remember actually meeting Dale Winton once, and he this was in my Virgin days when I was at Virgin, and he came up to me. We'd never met. He came up to me and he said, "Because you left UBN to go to Radio City in Liverpool, he took over from me," and that was the start that he had, like so many others. There were loads of us who went through there, and then it was just the right place at the right time. It felt like serving an apprenticeship in radio, and we were taught by the aforementioned Neil Spence, Dave Dennis, and he was he was hard on us, but hard and fair, which is what a boss should be. He was great and taught us so much, and we had to edit the old edit machines on the tapes, with the razor blades.
The razor blades.
Oh,
yes,
that was real editing. Now they've got a cushy.
Exactly.
And so we learnt everything from the ground up, and that led to lots of great careers.
He was also a great talent spotter, because you then went into commercial radio in Liverpool, didn't you?
That's right. Yes. And then I went to Radio City. They were looking for. They were looking. What did I do there? They were looking for somebody to do the music. Yes, look after the music. And I went for an interview, not thinking that I had any chance of getting it. But yeah, they took me on. So I spent about 5-6 months there. But then, while I was in Liverpool, loving it as well. I mean, it was a great place to be. I'd never lived outside of London, and boy, they talk about that Liverpool sense of humour, and goodness, was there a sense of humour? Except the day I arrived. The day I arrived, I had a very old Lotus Elan, and it had a soft top. And I didn't know about the fact that there was a lot of crime as well as good humour in Liverpool. And I parked the car on waste ground. I hadn't been there half an hour when there was a call from the police saying, and it had everything, all my belongings were inside. I was moving from London to Liverpool. And they said, "Your car's been broken into." But they caught the guy as they were doing it. So they saved the day for me.
And after that, what happened? You were in Liverpool.
Yeah, I was in Liverpool. I
Going
stayed
where?
there. That would have been when Radio City first started. I was on their second show, which was a mid-morning show, which was a shared show with a lady called Kim Freeman, and I did all sorts of shows. Actually, I even did a football show for them, which of course is religion in Liverpool, Everton, Liverpool. So I did a bit of everything, and again, it was a great learning curve. Um, and you never stop learning to this very day, even though I do it differently from here at home. Um, you never stop learning. And as long as you keep your ears and your eyes open, you're okay.
Well, you had a pretty steep learning curve with your next job because you actually took over the breakfast show from Kenny Everett on Capital. I mean, I can't imagine how daunting that must have felt on some level.
Yeah, you see, I thought I was going to be at Radio City for 1, 2 years maybe, but I woke up one morning there and I heard on the news that Kenny Everett had been, well, he was unwell, let's put it that way. And because, early mornings and Kenny just didn't go together, water and electricity. So I heard that he was going to leave the breakfast show on Capital. And I remember saying to my friend there, I said, oh, pity the poor person who has to take over from him. Can you imagine? It must have been 4 or 5 weeks later, and it was me, because I got a call in between time from Roger Scott, the great Roger, and he said, "Look, they're looking for some summer relief," and this was around about April time, and he said, "Why don't you come down?" So I went down, and they put me on a kids no, they put me on overnights to begin with. Then they put me on a kids Saturday morning show. At which time I remember I had somebody nudged me and said, "This could be an audition for you for the breakfast show." I said, "Don't be ridiculous. I've just arrived. Kenny's just gone. They're going to be looking for somebody with experience." And I was interviewing the new seekers that day, and I told them what was happening. I said, "Look, you better be good here. Make me look good, because this could be an interview for an audition, I should say, for the breakfast show." And so it turned out. The following Monday, I got called in, and I must tell you here, Helen, and people think I'm just joking when I say I got the job because I was cheap and cheerful, and it's absolutely true. That is the reason, because Capital had been going through very hard times when it had started about just over a year before. The music policy didn't gel with the public, and it was a 3-day week. They were running out of money, and the advertising wasn't coming in as a result. It was just a bad time. And it was so bad that our chairman, the lovely Sir Richard Attenborough, or as Kenny Everett would call him, Sir Dicky Boo, he actually used his artwork as collateral for the bank.
Wow.
And they kept the station going. And then, of course, it grew incredibly and became the station it was.
I just hate to break the news to you. You might have been cheap and cheerful, but they clearly thought you were very good too, because no
Well,
one risks their breakfast show.
well, I don't know, but I tell you something. If it had been me doing the hiring, I wouldn't have hired me. But I did get hired, and I know it wasn't to everybody's tastes, but you grow into it, you evolve into it, and in the end, I guess I proved myself, because I did two lots of 5 years, near enough 10 years in all, with a 2-year break in between. But they got
And you
me
also
back.
got higher numbers. You got more listeners than Kenny did, which is no reflection
Well,
on him and may have been about other
no.
things. But surely even you should see that was something to do with your skill.
Well, when the first audience research figures were coming in, I just said, look, if it only goes down a little bit, I feel like I've won. And incredibly, they went up. So I have no idea how, but maybe as you say, that it's all to do with various circumstances at the time, and Capital being very new then, and it takes a long time to get people to change their habits, their radio habits.
It absolutely does. Radio still is pretty habitual, interestingly enough, even though people spread their listening across more stations. No, I didn't say it was just circumstances. I said it might have been circumstances. It was also talent. But you were really playing with the big boys then, weren't you? Because although Capital had its challenges, it attracted some mega talent on air.
I remember going, and this is before I went to Radio City, I remember going for the initial auditions for Capital. And I remember it was in the City of London. And I think Dave Cash was overseeing it. And it was a long table, and we had to introduce records. We had to do an interview. The World and his wife were there. Well, I found out I'd been put on a short list Now, I think that shortlist actually stretched the entire length of the United Kingdom, Helen. But you know, it's right place, right time. I got that call from Roger. Said, look, they're looking for some summer relief, and everything just fitted into place. So, you know, I was lucky. But then you've got to sustain it. I know, but
You do, you
yeah,
really do. Luck will only get you so far. You do need talent and hard work as well, I would suggest. And you
yeah.
clearly
You know,
have, of course.
people think it's just easy, a doddle, just playing a few records. You try it, especially at that time of the morning.
Exactly right. And Capital had such a buzz, didn't it? I mean, I didn't live in London, but I was very, very aware of it feeling kind of cool and funky and unusual. What was that all about? Was that deliberate, or was it just because it was the new kid on the block?
We were the cool new kids on the block, and we did things differently. And we had a marvelous program controller, Michael Bucked, his real name. Michael Barry, people might remember, especially if you're watching this of a certain age, you might remember The Crafty Cook on television. It was the same guy. He was a fantastic, just a great character, a larger than life guy. And you know, he was always, now listen, he looked at it in a different way. You're talking to one person here. You know, you're talking to your friend. Do it differently, not shouting at everybody or being smashy and nicey. That was the exact opposite of what they wanted. And I think it appealed. It was something different for the audience. And we did things differently as well. We'd have there was a time where people were finding it difficult to find places to live. We had our flat share line, we had our helpline, doing just that, helping people with various problems. And what else did we have? We had
You had a
Anna,
great
Anna.
news. You had a great news service. I remember
Oh,
that.
fantastic! Absolutely. We even had classical programs on a Sunday. We had a bit of everything. It was called a full service radio station, where at the beginning the IBA or whoever it was running it at that time declared that that's what had to happen. You know, it wasn't just going to be pop and prattle. It was a bit of everything. I remember when Capital first started, we had an afternoon play every
Wow.
afternoon. So it was, as they say, a full service station. Um,
And you also had Anna Rayburn, didn't you?
yeah, we had Anna and the Doc. Now
Which in
this was
terms of commercial
yeah.
radio stations was unheard of.
It was very radical, and that's what appealed. We did radical things that hadn't been done on the radio before. No more radical than Anna and the Doc. This is Anna Rayburn handing out advice to people, and the Doctor handing out all sorts of intimate advice that would never have got anywhere near British radio before Capital. But good for the authorities; they let it go, and it was
I would
incredibly.
say, wouldn't I, Woman's Hour has always explored those things. I think commercial radio had never gone anywhere near it, and
Yeah.
neither had the other pop stations. It was really influential. A lot of the stuff you still hear on Radio 1, for example, aimed at young people and their problems, goes right back to Anna Rayburn.
Absolutely, but okay, we'll share it. We'll call it a score draw with Radio
Exactly,
4. Is
score
that okay?
draw on
Yeah,
Woman's Hour.
but it
But
was
you
a
know,
first.
you're completely right. For pop music radio, it was astonishing how bold it was. And
Yeah.
that kind of gave it a great deal of sassiness, I always thought. And of course, you had Princess Diana as one of your loyalist listeners. How did you discover she listened?
Well, she became a patron of Help a London Child, which was our big charity at the time, and I think she did because she loved Capital. She was a huge fan. You know, at the time, the young princes were just that. They were little babies in a way, and she used to listen early in the morning for all the reasons mums do get up early in the morning when they've got new kids. Um, and well, I know that she listened to me in the morning because the very first time or the second time I met her, I was introducing the Prince's Trust concert at Wembley Arena. And that morning on the breakfast show, I said, oh, you know, later on, I'm going to be meeting Princess Diana, Prince Charles as well. I'm going to be in the lineup. I hope I don't have a sweaty hand. Anyway, fast forward to the evening, just before the show starts. In she comes, and she comes up to me, beaming smile, shakes my hand, and said, "Dry as a bone." so, ah. So you're there early in the morning. What she didn't know was that I just before she came in, I dried it on the curtain behind me.
I believe she once told you a very risque joke, which you don't have to repeat, but you were rather taken aback.
Well, yeah, but you know, in a way, I was taken aback. But she had a fantastic sense of humour and a bit of a wicked one. I could tell you. There was always a glint in her eye.
Did you
Anyway,
meet her again?
Yeah, I met her on a few different occasions. Oh God, actually, there was one occasion where I was on the air. I was doing the lunchtime show during that breakfast show gap, and the phone rang, the internal phone in the studio, and I picked it up, and the voice said, "Oh, hello, Graham. This is the Princess of Wales." Now, it's not really something you expect, is it? So I thought it was the office downstairs having a go, and luckily I kept my language well and truly the way it should be, and and then the person who'd set this up without telling me, who actually was a friend of Princess Diana, came through the door knowing that I was in disbelief here and just not taking this on board at all. And she said, "It really is her." And so I went back to the phone and I said, "Oh, Princess of Wales, hello. I'm so sorry about that. Would you mind hanging on? I've got to go to a commercial break." So I had to put her on hold again while she listened to adverts for baked beans and probably Brentford nylons as well. Anyway, I went back and she said, "Oh, Graham, yes, I said, "I'm so sorry, Your Royal Highness, about making you hold on like that." She said, "Oh, don't worry about that. I just rang up to wish you a happy birthday." So she'd been told it was my birthday, and she rang me. And of course, it was set up by the
Yeah, but she was brilliant at those small gestures for individuals, wasn't
yeah,
she?
and she did it again. She did it another time as well. I was prepared that time though. Yeah, and she also came into my very last breakfast show.
Oh.
Yeah, it was my
Well,
last
she came
one.
into the studio or
Mm,
behind the glass.
yeah, yeah. I knew that she was coming in. There was only about two or three of us who did. But the program controller at the time had no idea. She hadn't been told. She wasn't well impressed. But yeah, it was about 8:30 in the morning, and the door swung open. I think I was doing the news headlines at the time. The red light the other side of the door meant nothing. The door swung open, and I'm looking round, and it's her. And anyway, she comes round and she sits on the sofa opposite the all the doings. And as it was my last show, I had Chris Tarrant one side of the sofa, her on the other side. And you can imagine, I mean, it's your last show on breakfast ever, and that's bad enough that you've got to deal with, but then having those two as well, because I mentioned Chris because he was taking over on the Monday, so I was introducing him. He had no idea she was coming in either, so it was just as much of a surprise to him. And I remember during that last half an hour, she brought out a tape from her handbag. It was a cassette, and she said, "Oh, could you play a track off of this, Graham?" And I thought, well, I said, "Well, unfortunately, we can't play cassettes." So my producer Mick Brown went scuttling down to the record library, which is a million miles away, of course, right the way down the other end of the building, and got out the vinyl version of Top Gun. It was the soundtrack to Top Gun, and she wanted the instrumental from that. So I thought, well, how am I going to play this? Anyway, I put it on, and I did it. I used it as background music while I was doing whatever I was doing. So, and actually another time, and the funny thing was though, looking at those, I remember the famous eyes, the look, and seeing Diana there during that last half an hour is something I'll never forget. That image. And another thing was once again, it was at a reception for our Princess Trust shows. She came over to me, rushed over, and she said, Graham, can you play me a request in the morning?" I said, "Yes, what would you like?" And this took ages. We couldn't think of any record. Eventually we came up with Billy Joel, Uptown Girl. I said, "That's very appropriate." So the next morning, around about 8:15 at the agreed time, I played the record for her. And afterwards I said, "There's Billy Joel, and I hope he appreciates the royalties," which was one of my better lines.
It's a great line. I'm impressed. That is very shrewd.
And it's the funny thing was, and another thing I remember, Helen, after that, coming out of the building, the press were there because obviously they knew she was there, and there were big stars of the time, all the big pop stars who had been appearing at the Princess Trust concerts, and of course they made a beeline for them. But I had the story, and nobody asked me a thing.
Absolutely.
My story was, I'm playing her request. I wouldn't have actually said it, but yeah, they missed out there.
Hinted, they would have got the gist. Yeah. It's such an innocent time to think about her turning up without maximum security, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a lovely photograph, and we're going to put that on screen now. And I've got a couple from that day, the last show, when she came downstairs afterwards and had a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and she's just in the sweater that you can see there. just in her civvies, really. She looked lovely, as you can see, and just with the required person who has to go with her everywhere. I won't say an armed guard because he certainly wasn't that, but he was the one taking the photograph. And that was in our office downstairs.
Hard to imagine that these days with so many extra pressures around security.
Different
but that
times.
informality was her stamp, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's what she loved doing.
Yeah.
And she could have done so much more, Helen.
Yeah.
She was just at the start of, really, I mean, I can't, you can't say anything less than the fact that she was going to help change the world for the better. Yeah. She'd done the mind, she'd been involved with AIDS, and when she spoke, people listened, and imagined that the world today, had she lived, could have been a so much better place.
Yeah. She was a bright spark, wasn't she? Elton John did get it right in that song.
Yep.
But it was a time of phenomenal popularity of radio DJs. I mean, you were like rock stars in your own way. Were you ever in a situation where you suddenly realized how famous you were?
Well, Tony Blackburn always says that he was, not he, but the Radio 1 guys at the time, at their height, were as big as the people whose records they were playing. And I can understand that, because that did happen to me once during my time on The Breakfast Show. I had to go to the Wimbledon Theatre to do something or other. And I came out and there was these huge crowds. I mean, massive crowds. And I actually got mobbed. And there's not much of me to be mobbed, at 5'3". And it was quite a frightening experience, but I thought, my goodness, this is incredible. And the power of radio. And I thought, I'm not worthy of this. This is absolutely ridiculous. But it was lovely, but it was quite frightening as well. And I'm not quite sure I knew how to handle it. Luckily, I had a friend with me who was much taller, and he managed to usher me, get me in the car. But it just was one of those amazing moments when you appreciate just how much you can mean to somebody.
Really, and many millions. It was an extraordinary moment, I think, that whole period for the presenters.
Very much so.
You moved on eventually to Capital Gold, which also had a huge number of these big figures, all of you in a sort of a moment of transition, really, I guess, because fashions change and the zeitgeist moves on. Yeah. What was that like?
Well, it was at a time when the big stations were splitting their frequencies. So we were on FM and AM. And they thought it would be a good idea to have separate programs. So FM for the younger audience, and the playing the pop hits, and AM to do whatever they fancied doing. And in our case, it was gold. It was Capital Gold. So we were playing the oldies, and we had a fantastic lineup. Tony Blackburn was doing The Breakfast Show. They'd moved me on to, and I was very grateful to be there, on Drive. People like David Hamilton were there. Who else was there? Mike Reed was there. Paul Burnett. It was a great lineup.
The greats. I mean, a phenomenal lineup.
And that could have been what Boom Radio is today, had they kept it going. Because Boom now, which is such a fantastic station. I love being on it. We all love being part of Boom. It's like a contemporary version of the past. It's
it's a great phrase.
Us boomers, we are the radio generation that music radio has forgotten, and the BBC, I think, really did miss a trick here. I think they could have, this digital age, Helen, they could have made a Radio 7. They could have done what Boom Radio is doing now. And you know what? I'm really pleased they didn't, because otherwise I might be out of a job.
So listening to you, it comes across that you're almost surprised by your own success. I mean, I'm not sure why. You've got a wonderful voice. You've got a clear passion for music and a very, very good rapport for your audience and interest in your audience. Looking back, are you as surprised as I think you are, and why?
Yes, to all that. You've hit the nail on the head, Helen, as always. Still today, when people come up and say, "Oh, I remember listening to you and you did this and that on The Breakfast Show," and that was the big one for me, The Breakfast Show. That's what people really remember. And then moving on to other radio stations, and there were big stations as well. I was at the start of Virgin, which was actually my first time as broadcasting to the UK. although not many people were listening at that time. But anyway, that's another story. And then after that, I thought, every time I left a station or they left me, I thought, well, that's going to be the end. Where now? But no, then there was Magic. And I stayed there for the best part of 10 years as well. And then off to, where did I go? Oh, Smooth, of course. Yes, Smooth was setting up. And I was offered the breakfast show there. And although in the end it didn't work out because we were all made redundant, it's something I don't regret, because getting back to breakfast in London, it was a London station at that point, I just thought, well, I'd be a fool not to. But so in the end, all these radio stations started consolidating, as you know, Helen, where they buy up all the local radio stations and broadcast one show from probably from London, somewhere like that, and broadcasting all around those lovely local radio stations that people were much lamented, because they were a part of people's lives. They were proper local radio. And it was a great shame, but that's the way it goes. Money matters.
It does. And you ended up at some point in BBC local radio, which must have been very different, but a kind of perfect circle.
I came full circle, absolutely. I started in admin, as I told you earlier, and then finished up actually talking into a BBC microphone. It was BBC local radio in Sussex and Surrey, where they gave me carte blanche. They gave me, I did lots of shows for them actually, and that was another learning curve, because BBC local radio is very, very different. Suddenly I had to be doing interviews with a politician and reading scripts and doing bits of news. But my main show there was on a Saturday at midday. It was 2 hours long, and it was like a diner. It was like I had a jukebox there, and the first hour was 50s and 60s, second hour 70s, and latterly the 80s as well, as we got a bit younger. And I loved it because they let me choose all the music, and it went down very well with the audience. But nothing lasts forever, does it? So, and of course, the BBC started to aim younger, and so the show went.
And now you're back with something you love in Boom.
Boom has been, it's a godsend. It really is. I can't tell you how much we all love working for it. And for the guys who set it up, we got Phil Riley and also David Lloyd. When David got in touch with me, I mean, these two guys are hugely respected in the business. And I'd actually been speaking to David Lloyd, who does our mid-morning show brilliantly as well. He does everything brilliantly. Hate him. And we'd been talking about the kind of radio station that has been lacking. I said the generation that music radio forgot, the boomers, because of the BBC getting younger and younger. And I know the regulators were enforcing that.
But for you, really, the music remains the heart and soul of the creative pleasure you get from it. You so clearly are interested in the music.
Yeah, no question. Music is king. That's what Boom Radio is all about. That's why people are listening to us on Boom. We just help it swing along a little bit, but the music speaks volumes, and it's so varied. It reflects people's record collections. It could be, the other day I was playing something by Glenn Miller. And in the same show, I think it was, I was playing Robert Plant and Alison Krauss and a bit of Steely Dan as well, and everything in between. So that's what our point of difference is. It's not just the same old, same old. We're very varied, and one of our main points is not to keep repeating the records over and over again. So thank goodness Boom Radio is here for us boomers.
Indeed. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to look back on your career. Thank you very, very much indeed.
I actually think that I should be interviewing you with your career. So it's been an equal honour to talk to you, I can tell you. So thank you, Helen. It's been great.
Keep playing and I'll keep listening. Take care.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Music for our generation.